Hey everybody, welcome to my Lunch and Learn. I'm Vince Marino, and I got a good friend and guest today, Nick Terranova with HOMA Pumps. Nick, before we get started, why don't you tell us a little about you and your company?
HOMA is a submersible pump manufacturer. We're a German manufactured pump. We've been in the business from 1946. I started out of a small family electric motor repair shop and kind of blossomed into the international company that it is today. We've been stateside since the 80s, and we've just kind of been snowballing from there. As far
Amazing.
as my relationship with it, I've been involved in the company for a long, long time, probably getting on 20 years or so now. Started mowing the lawns, sweeping the shop, came to the repair department, did diagnostic tear downs, did a little bit of assembly while I was getting my engineering degree, did some project engineering work, application work that brought me inside the office. It felt real important then. Graduated with my degree in nuclear engineering to find that the pump business was really still more where I wanted to be, and I've just kind of stayed with it ever since.
Well, that's amazing. Nuclear engineering too. That's quite a lofty aspiration for you to achieve. I'm sure you're taking a lot of that knowledge that you received during that time and applying it to Homa and what you're
Some
doing.
of it, and it's people always ask me, they're like, "Don't you wish that you'd kind of stayed in that industry?" And I talk to some of my friends that still work at reactors, that still work in the industry and whatnot. It just seems like such a headache. I much
Yeah.
prefer being involved in our industry. It's much more relaxed, friendly, uh, and just not quite the same level of stress that you'd get otherwise.
Well, okay, since you brought that up, what are some of your customers facing today, and how do you help them solve it? So let's talk about that. Where are the where are the challenges of today in the pump industry, and how does HOMA come in to help them solve those?
So I would say probably the biggest challenge that most municipalities are facing, we're focused a little bit more on municipal wastewater and solids handling pumps. So the real big thing for us is modern wastewater. And so that means low water content, high percent solids. You've got very difficult solids with the quote unquote flushable wipes. You've got a lot of headaches that come with handling what used to be a much more reliable, consistent product. And now all of a sudden you've got everything coming down your way, and it's creating a lot of issues for municipalities that don't have the infrastructure or the equipment to be able to handle that. So from our end, it's important to try to develop products that are able to strike that good balance between being effective and efficient, because it's very easy to make a product that is going to work extremely well in a nice, clean pool of water. And then it's also very easy to make a product that will pump whatever you want, but finding the right balance between those two is where kind of the magic lies, and that's what we're focused on.
Right. So, um, for people that are new to this conversation, um, it's a challenge. Even things like these fibers and strings, dental floss, flushable wipes. Ultimately, what's happening, and I'm not the scientist here, but I've seen some of the results that are just horrifying.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
they're fibrous threads that wrap around a shaft or a bearing on a pump situation, and they just start to accumulate and accumulate and accumulate. And before you know it, you've got this, uh, lack of better words, a rag
A rag
of,
ball. Yeah.
yeah. And it's a, and they're, and they, I've seen these, and they're horrible. They smell horrible. They're a big mess, and they actually, if I'm not mistaken, can they burn up a motor?
Oh, absolutely. And
Yeah.
even if you're not completely jamming a pump, if you jam a pump, it's just going to sit there and it's going to cook itself, and then eventually that motor's going to burn out. Even if your thermals trip and it shuts off, the motor protection is not infallible, and you've probably raised the motor temperature enough that it's going to either severely damage the insulation and decrease the lifespan of that motor, or you may just outright cook it. But that's if the pump is locked up hard. What people don't always know is that if you have the formings of something like that, if you have rags catching on the impeller and the seals, maybe between the impeller and the volute walls, even if it's not fully locked, you're getting a lot of extra drag in the equation. And that's going to increase your current draw, and that's going to potentially result in higher operating temperatures for your motor. And over a prolonged period of time, higher operating temperatures are the enemy of your motor insulation. And it will, even if it's not going to outright lock up, bake the whole thing, it will over time slowly break down the insulation and increase the temperature such that it's going to kill your pump much more quickly than you would otherwise in a preferred operating place. So that's something that people they think, oh, as long as it's running, it's running. But no, there's a spectrum between running and completely jammed, and everywhere along the middle is a varying point of bad.
So can I mean, again, this is somewhat of a casual conversation, Nick. We go a ways back, actually a couple of years back now, and I even had the pleasure of bumping into you at EFOT in Germany, which was kind of I thought it was a pretty high note for our relationship. I mean, it was
Mm-hmm.
like we're both Americans, born and raised in America, but meeting in Munich, Germany at the EFOT show.
It felt very
That's a good,
continental of us. Yeah.
but it was, and good memories too. I mean,
Hmm.
and by the way, the HOMA booth is, superb. You
They
could
do
tell.
an amazing job. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm saying that as objectively as I can. I'm not trying to just compliment Homa, but anybody that gets to that level, I mean, you've got to be impeccable with the way you present your product, and they certainly did not disappoint. And you guys are great here in the U.S. as well. I was just going to ask you. I mean, again, casual conversation, just sort of talking pumps. It's what we're all about. If you run into something, okay, you go into a municipality and a non-HOMA pump is there, and they've gotten eaten up with a rag monster or the motor is compromised, and they say, you know what, I've had it with brand X. What are some of the challenges or methodologies of replacing, again, existing pump, not yours, bringing
Hmm.
yours in? It just doesn't seem like it's a light bulb. I could be wrong, but
No, that's a fantastic question. And it's kind of an ongoing issue that we have to deal with because some people think that it is just like you're saying that light bulb. And you're like, oh, pull out whatever you've got in there and put in the same thing or the closest equivalent with a different manufacturer's label on it. And that can really be a recipe for disaster. I like to think about it in the terms of it's a little over dramatic, but if I slam my hand in my door and I break my finger, I go to the doctor, he fixes me up. The next day, I slam my hand in the same door and I go back in the doctor. I'm like, Doc, I broke both of my fingers. Like it keeps happening every time I slam my hand in the door. And that's kind of what happens a lot of times when people try to retrofit equipment without getting the whole picture. I always say it. I always say it. Every pump manufacturer makes a good pump. And it kind of comes down to some real fine points uh, as to what helps some users over others and why they would tend to gravitate towards one manufacturer or the other. But if you have a pump that's just routinely dying, it's like, oh, this it this pump is terrible, and it doesn't mean that brand XYZ is terrible. It means that that pump might not be sized correctly. It might be running in a bad spot. And if you just replace it like for like
Right.
without doing any of your appropriate due diligence, it's going to have the exact same result. So that's something that I try to be very deliberate with when I'm speaking to people is don't just replace a broken piece of your puzzle with the closest piece you've got, because that doesn't take into account, let's say, they sized that pump maybe 25 years ago and they designed it for a specific system curve.
Right.
Now, in the intervening 20 years, that population of that served area might have doubled. It might have halved. You might have a school there now you didn't before. Maybe you've got a commercial endeavor, an industrial plant or something that's completely changing the makeup of the system. And if you don't take that into account and you just say, well, I have to replace it with the same thing, then that might spell some issues for you later on. Um, so I'm glad that you mentioned that because it can definitely lead to some issues. And it never feels good when you're the person going into a situation like that, trying to replace a problematic piece of equipment, and yours becomes the new problematic piece of equipment.
Right, but we're talking more, more we're talking about in terms of pump replacement, root cause analysis as to what happened to the existing product.
Mm.
Um, I, you and I, I'm glad that we're talking today. Just a few days ago, I did repair and maintenance summit, and you would have been great on that too. I had a bunch of engineers and a bunch of root cause analysis people, and um, in the end, it just seemed like the overall theme was talking, listening, understanding, right? What's
Mhm.
going on with the pump. So you could have the best pump in the world, but if you don't understand why that one that you're replacing burned out, you're just going to continue to have problems. So uh, human communication is still, and I say human now because we got this AI thing, right? Which is which is also a valuable tool. But I do believe that if you talk to the person, here's what happened to the pump, this is what's going on. And like you said, populations change. They either double or they're halved. I mean, there's content in the sewage is changed, all kinds of things. So it seems like the overriding metaphor is don't just assume and start unbolting and putting your product on, but understand.
Absolutely. The first thing that I always try to get is what is the pump that they're looking to replace, or what the pump that is now dead or might replace in the future, what is the actual operating point there? Because people will usually give you, maybe they'll give you a design point where it was designed to hit 30 years ago. That's if you're lucky. If you're a little less lucky, then maybe you've got the model of the pump that they're replacing. You can get a curve for that. Maybe they have a curve on file and you're just going to replace that exact curve. But if you can get the actual operating data, which no matter what, it's always possible to get some amount of operating data. And this is why I always try to emphasize that everybody involved in pump maintenance, pump diagnostics, pump teardowns, all sorts of things, everybody should really make a little bit of an effort to try to learn how to read pump curves, because that's going to be invaluable towards doing these diagnostic teardowns, doing some diagnostic work. And then when it comes time to replace, then it's a lot easier for you to be able to say, this is exactly where the pump was operating. And sometimes people will get a little bit confused because they'll say, oh, well, it has this duty point right here, without noticing that in, for instance, a typical lift station, you have a water level. And when ideally, you start a pump, that water level is going to go down. And that's going to change your system curve. That's going to change your operating point. And people will not always remember that, oh, I need to have like a high level and a low level system curve and be able to look at the bracket in the middle to make sure that I'm not going to start in a good spot and then move to a bad spot.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Be able to,
information is always the name of that game. And like you're saying, having an open dialogue with people that may know something about the system that you don't. I hear a lot of kind of horror stories about, town engineers and the metaphorical ivory tower that won't listen to the maintenance guys, or vice versa. The maintenance guys that they're working on tribal knowledge from 30, 40 years ago, and maybe they're not aware that something has changed, that the engineer didn't make them make a point to tell them, or they didn't listen to that. And so just being able to communicate between people, between departments, it is a vastly underrated skill, even within like a municipality.
yeah. So you're kind of touching on my next question, actually, Nick. What what innovations and technologies that are kind of coming down the pike? What are some of those innovations or technologies that excite you that as it relates to HOMA and so forth? Is it AI? Is it a new impeller design? I mean, what is it?
Mhm. I think it's not new at this point, but I do think that the increased like kind of durability and ease of use of a lot of the variable frequency drive features out there are getting to be at a point where they're extremely good, extremely helpful in dealing with the long-term life cycle operation of a pump. And so when I'm talking about some of their more advanced features, I'm talking about like deragging cycles, being able to look at your current draw and observe like over time, like, okay, something's going on here. Maybe I'm ragged up, maybe I'm jammed up, run it backwards, maybe unstick whatever's in there, being able to do a deragging cycle on startup as part of your formula. Say run it back at 40 hertz backwards just to make sure whatever was left at the very end of your last pump cycle gets spit out a little bit. Slow start it back up to 60, and now you're running at full steam. So having a lot of flexibility in there is good. And I think we're starting to get down to a cost level where it's making a lot more sense. Whereas in before, you wouldn't be able to justify a lot of these systems, a lot of these features to most municipalities. But as they've gotten more effective, as the cost has gone down on them, and they've been proven to be very effective at decreasing your life cycle costs, all of a sudden it starts making a lot more sense for a municipality to look at this and say, well, is it worth spending, you know, X thousand dollars to save Y $10,000 over time? And I think that that's a good, robust part of our industry that is able to work with everybody's equipment. It's a good puzzle piece. And so it's every VFD manufacturer out there worth their salt is putting these features into their equipment on some level, or looking at it and being able to say, oh, I mean, I want to use this pump and this VFD. They all play nice. Everybody's pretty like non-denominational on that front. And
Yeah,
I like having that sort of almost like collaboration sort of feel to it, where they're solving it from this side, we're solving it from that side. You hit the middle, and then everybody's got a good benefit for the system. That's probably
let me
where
ask
where I'm most excited right now. Yeah.
yeah, okay, so um, all good points, but you mentioned the deragging mode, and I'm visualizing this in my head as this pump is showing some distress, so it gradually comes to a stop, and then rewinds and goes the other way, which is fine. I totally get that, but it's done via VFD, so it's a gradual stop and then
Hmm.
a gradual reverse. I'm wondering if I'm thinking of this more of a layman's term. Okay, I don't know if you ever seen the front end loader where a guy scoops up dirt and then proceeds to dump it, and it's very abrupt, but he wants to get all the dirt out of the front end loader, and he kind of bang, 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 and you hear
Hmm.
that it's very loud and clanky and mechanical, and it's not VFD. It's actually very abrupt
Yep, right on the
hydraulics.
hydraulics. Yeah.
My question to you is there some kind of happy medium? Because there's one thing to come to a slow stop and rewind it, and I get all that, but is there also some merit to a hard stop, hard reverse, kind of jerk loose the fibers and or am I wrong? Is there anything out there like that too? Just curious.
There's definitely some times when I'll see those run. That was definitely the in the old times, before there was any of this sort of functionality, if you had a three phase, you'd just pull to the leads, bang them across the line, run it backwards, and it was very much that. It would just kick on, start up. Um, the issue there is that it it just kind of can be a little bit abrupt inside of the pump. It doesn't love moving in that direction, and so you can create a lot of vibration that might hurt maybe the seals a little bit more than you'd prefer. And so on more of a life cycle view, it can add up a little over time. I have definitely seen ones where it'll
Yeah.
basically like shuck it and jive it. And that works really well for unseating some really aggressive stuff. Um, Hopefully you're not having that degree of issue, which is why I really like when people run the kind of preventative routine startup uh derag cycles, just that kind of quick like run it backwards for 15, 20 seconds, just make sure that it's not going to get this stuff built up over time and then kick it on because it
Wow.
tends to
Can you
prevent
put,
some of those.
yeah, let me ask you about that. Is there a way you can just put that on like a daily?
Oh, absolutely. You can do it on every single cycle. You can do it on alternating cycles. You can do it whenever you like. The amount of programming that goes into these control systems is amazing, and it gives you a lot of flexibility. I don't even pretend to be remotely versed in the control side of the business. That's a whole other
Yeah.
uh, area that I'm always a little bit impressed by when people that are able to handle those. But there's a lot of flexibility, and people can usually program in kind of whatever cycles, whatever frequencies, however you want to do it. And it's just trying to figure out what's going to be the most optimal for your situation, because maybe it might not be worth running one of those every single cycle. Maybe it's worth running it once a day, maybe only after like your highest demand times. So maybe after maybe after the mornings and after the evenings, but during the middle of the day, whatever.
Yeah, or maybe at uh, a midnight or 2 a.m. kind of like when your phone reboots or restart, or,
Hmm.
upgrades or whatever. I was thinking this actually is a true story. I was at a small municipal water wastewater facility in the rural Alabama, and one of the problems they were having was they weren't there 24/7. And late at night, there was this wash down process of a plant. I think it was a chicken plant that was sending hot water and suds
Hmm.
down the system at like midnight, we'll say. And they were destroying equipment on the other end. I think bearings and shafts were twisting and all kinds of interesting things were happening that were directly related to the hot water and soap suds that were intermittently coming through the system because the best efficiency point was set for water wastewater. And
Right.
then this massive amount, like I said, hot water and bubbles came through, and it completely changed the characteristics of the pump cycling and the
Hmm.
behavior. So again, root cause analysis and talking, and sometimes just stopping and looking at the big picture, what's going on, you know.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's a definitely an art. I do a presentation on doing diagnostic teardowns and approaching them from a system point of view. And that's something that I try to emphasize is you walk through, you take a piece of equipment apart, and you can look at it and you can say, ah, this part broke. I'm going to replace that part. But you also have the opportunity in that moment to look through all of the available information, and it's almost like it equates to be like one of those murder mystery kind of pushpin boards, and you got to draw all the red lines between
right.
because you put together two, three pieces of evidence, and all of a sudden you can start drawing a picture. And think, okay, well, these three pieces failed in a way that indicates that the pump was vibrating. Okay, why was the pump vibrating? Well, is it operating in a good area of the curve? Maybe. Well, what would cause that to change? And so it's always taking that step back, the asking why like four or five times. Okay, why did this happen? Well, because of this. Well, why did that happen? Because of that. And eventually you get back far enough, and you have something approaching an answer usually. But unfortunately, in a lot of cases, it's you can never really pin an exact issue, but you can at least, and like in this case, that would have been a real interesting one to try to work back from. Like, why are all our pumps failing at this point because of this reason?
Yeah.
And then if no one had that conversation and looked at what the actual like system was facing at such a weird a time,
Well,
in that
talk a little,
case, yeah,
yeah, talk a little bit more about your about HOMA specific after sale, aftermarket, and support. So I buy the pump, and inevitably I'm going to need something from you guys. How does that work? I mean, if you can just kind of give us I mean,
yeah.
background history of where you are today. I seems to recall that you have a pretty good warehouse full of supplies.
Yeah, we got a lot of parts right behind me, right through that wall. We're sitting on probably about 25 million distributor dollar inventory back there, 40,000 foot warehouse, just back to the gills. Honestly, we're starting to run out of room a little bit. Um, and that's to service our aftermarket side. It's really difficult to be an operator if you don't have confidence that you can get replacement parts because you have to assume that that piece of equipment is going to have some issue with it, no matter whose it is, no matter what it is. Something bad is going to happen on midnight on Christmas Eve when it's raining outside and it's going to be just hell to pay. So that's always been our philosophy is trying to be a good long-term service partner, making sure that we keep as many components as we have available so that we can get them out next day for people, making sure that we've got good expertise in house and that we try to work with people as well as our distribution to try to identify what these issues are, make sure that we're not just continuing to send the exact same broken part over, trying to identify like, well, maybe we can change this out. Are you facing erosion from grit? Maybe you should try using a plasma ion nitriding process on your impeller so it doesn't erode because you didn't realize that there was much sand in your basin as actually there is. So that's always been our philosophy is trying to be a good long-term partner. We always emphasize the life cycle support, life cycle costs of doing business with us. And that's it's not easy, And it's also a very holistic thing because you can't just jump in tomorrow from another person or another manufacturer's perspective and say, oh, well, I'm going to be a good service partner. You have to spend decades stocking up the back warehouse like we have. You have to have good tribal knowledge of how our pumps operate in certain situations in certain places. And having that sort of long term knowledge has helped us, I think, greatly to
Yeah.
increase the kind of dedicated user base that we have. And like I said way before, everybody's making a good pump. So this is the kind of thing that we hang our hat on as making sure that we emphasize for our users, because that's where you really have to make your hay is these tiny little details. And it might not sound tiny, but for a lot of people, it's not the first thing that they think of is the long term benefit of the equipment.
Yeah. Let me ask you to drill down a little bit more
Mhm.
the the grit situation. That actually was one of the challenges. I was talking to another wastewater plant operator in southern Alabama on kind of the Gulf Coast area, and he was going through some impellers relatively quickly, and his mind went to, I believe it's the sand because they're kind of a Gulf region. He thought it was the grit or the sand.
Mhm.
What was the solution that you were talking about on the impeller?
So we've had really, really good success with plasma ion nitriding. And that is a process. It's a decades old process. So it's not even anything particularly new, but it's basically taking a standard cast iron piece of equipment, your impeller, your volute, your pressure cover, whatever, or all of the above,
Right,
and then they bake it in like a super high temperature nitrogen rich environment with like a little bit of black magic mixed in, and it surface hardens the cast iron. It doesn't through harden it, but you get a super hard outer layer, boundary layer,
hmm,
and that has a couple of benefits. One, you get to do all of the machining and all of the like casting and everything with cast iron, which is much less expensive than if you were doing it with like a high chrome or a stainless steel or something like that.
right,
So I can keep cast iron parked on the shelf, use them every day for normal equipment, then take them off and then send them to our materials processing facility, and they can harden that one up whenever I need it to be done. About like an extra couple of days of lead time. It also, by way of having just that surface layer, you still get that kind of that creamy center of cast iron, so you don't have the brittleness that you might have with some of the more completely hardened equipment out there. So it's better at handling the combination of, say, grit as well as larger rocks and things like that that you might run into. Because sometimes if you get these super, super hard materials, you can get a rock in there and it can crack your impeller vane because you just don't quite have the same
right.
softness inside. I think with the first place that we tried utilizing this was it was down in Fernandina Beach, Florida. Um, so not in
Okay.
the Gulf, but the opposite side. But they, I think they were going through an impeller probably every 6 months. It was just chewing itself apart. And after we looked a little bit into the process, we tried it with some of their pumps, and they have since standardized on using it. I think we went from about 6 month lifespan to about 6 year lifespan on some of
That's
the cast iron components down there.
I love these.
Because
This is why I do this lunch and learn right here. So if we can reboot for 1 second, what is the process? I want to look it up. Nitro.
plasma ion nitriding.
Okay, plasma ion nitriding.
Hmm.
Right? Okay, so I'm looking. Where do you get this done? I mean, this is kind of cool.
We have a local metallurgical processing facility that has done it for us for years. And
You saying
a
that?
very it's a very convenient and very quick process all told, and it's given us a lot of flexibility when it comes to going against some aggressive grit and sand and rocks and things like that that otherwise your typical cast iron wouldn't really be up to snuff for.
Wow, this is kind of cool though. I mean, I honestly was unaware of that. There was one thing I remember um, probably a decade ago. They were talking about diamond coating. Have you heard about that? Where
No, I'm not familiar with that.
micro, oh, it's just honestly, it was a micro diamond
Hmm.
coating of material, and it was just it would just settle down on the impeller parts with this, like I said, and I'm not talking about wedding ring diamond. I'm talking about,
No, but like an industrial
like
diamond. I've heard about that in terms of something similar to that in terms of like you talk about like the mining industry when you're like cutting rock and things like that. You have that sort of diamond tip blade. But I've
right.
never heard of that in the pumping industry. That makes a lot of sense though.
Yeah, but this is. I mean, I know enough about impellers to be dangerous. I'm not going to say I'm a pro at it, but I've learned a lot about impellers and uh, axial thrust and other pump killers. But I never heard about this, and it's here in the U.S. that you can get this done, and it's just a couple days lead time.
For us, yeah, we've got a vendor, a very good vendor that we work with, and I usually, if somebody's ordering a piece of equipment, we'll quote in an extra week just because they got to drive down, pick it up, then drive back up. But it's
Got it.
uh, it's a very very nice process, very quick turnaround for us. Yeah.
Wow, this is why I love to do these and impromptu. This is not a you don't have a list of questions that I'm going to ask you and all that, but let me flip the script a little bit. If you were to say, hey, this is the one thing I would like to bring to this particular lunch and learn, like what in the back of your mind were you wanting to, focus on? Take
Honest,
the reins. I mean, is there anything in particular that's new or coming down the pike?
Honestly, the thing that I was probably the most interested in talking about was exactly what your very first question was about retrofitting pumps, about talking about retrofitting equipment, and going through the some of the things to watch out for on that front. So
Huh.
you read my mind on that one. I was so impressed. I'm like, did I send him something? I don't think I did. Yeah.
No, no, no. Well, you know what? You know what? And again, this is, whoop, sorry. I've got this, I got my laptop kind of jacked up on a elevated area here. So let me pull something up while we're talking. And by the way, feel free to share your screen too, if
Mhm.
there's anything in particular. But I'm kind of going through our website, and again, full transparency. If for anybody that's new to our website, please go to empoweringpumps.com and check things out there. I'm going to go to this little gem right here, retrofitting a municipal pump. This is you on the cover story a while back regarding this.
Yeah.
So, it's not too far of a stretch for me to have that, to bring up that part of it. And we can talk more about this. So yes, part of my thought process was asking about retrofitting. But before we go down that rabbit hole, let me just show you this. So I go to empoweringpumps.com, and there's a section here called Empowering Pumps in Industry Conference. Are you seeing that right there?
Yep. Mhm.
Now, one of the things that we're talking about at this event, this is at San Jack in Pasadena, Texas, just outside of Houston.
Mhm.
A couple of our sponsors are actually talking about doing a demo of retrofitting a pump. So if you've ever been to San Jac, and again, have you ever been there? I'm just curious. At
I've
San
never
Jac.
been. No.
So I again, these are all. This is completely impromptu. No one planned this event, but if you look at the video here, you'll just see. And I'm going to mute it. So if you kind of if you look through this video on the website, ah, you know what? I got to freeze up here, so we'll just continue here. It's always that way. Yeah. So here's the website. We have great speakers at this. This is the San Jac facility. But one of the things that they have back behind this stage here is a tremendous lab. So I'm going to go to that here. You can see these guys are in this lab here, right?
Mhm.
Right here. And the students at this facility learn how to treat a factory, and then they go back out to the factory and kind of make these changes. So I guess I didn't do a really good job explaining that. Let me kind of, so you have the floor, you can talk to the crowd in general, and then do these little sub labs, if you will. And one of the labs discussed about coming this November is where we're going to take the a pump out of the and again it's like a 1/5 scale factory and do a swap out of a pump. So you can see these guys. This is a glass lab. The whole thing is all about learning and talking about your product as it relates to the industry, right?
Mhm.
So there's that glass lab, and behind there is this plant factory. And I'm just droning on and on about it, but so I get it honestly. You're on the cover of our magazine. You had 510 views on the article that where people downloaded it. It's good. It's a good information. You had a lot of people that saw that and kind of said, "Hey, I want to know more about that." Right.
Mhm.
And then you couple it with this conversation that we're having this November at Epic, and there was some, hey, let's do a pump swap and show how that goes on. And you can see how it was pretty easy for me to leap to that when having you on this particular version of Lunch and Learn. So you're happy that I put that on the ball on the tee. And I'm super excited because I learned something new, which was about this plasma hardening. Maybe a lot of people in the pump industry know about that, but this is a first for me. So
I will
anyway,
say that a lot more people have never heard of it than have. When I speak about it, we've been doing it for some years now, but every time I have a conversation with somebody in the exact same spot, it seems like it's the first time they've ever heard of it. Maybe
yeah,
once in a while, maybe one out of every 10 people, if that, has some exposure to it or maybe has heard of it before, but yeah, it's definitely not a typical industry standard.
right.
But
So anyway,
I think you're right though. There's a lot of interest and a lot of demand for knowledge about retrofitting equipment. It's it used to be, call it 20 years ago, even maybe even shorter, maybe 10 years ago. Uh, you if you were a municipality, you were a XYZ brand house. And it was a lot more common for people to just lock in on a manufacturer and live with them. But the realities of the last few years with supply chain issues, with varying kind of issues and threats regarding pricing and availability and lead times, it's really upset that kind of single brand loyalty that you used to see. And now you're seeing a lot of people exploring options that they didn't know were even an option before. If you thought like, oh, I have an XYZ in here and now I can use an ABC over there. It's like, well, maybe it's finally worth looking at that and knowing
yeah,
what goes into that procedure if you've
Right.
never done it before. Then just like you were saying, some people will think that it's just as easy as, swap your Kleenex for a Puffs Plus, but it's
Yeah,
not.
yeah. No, but what's interesting, and being around for several years in this industry and kind of watching things, um, the people that have been at that municipality and kind of dominated it, we'll just kind of leave it like that, have been awfully quiet. Like it's just sort of like don't disturb thing, you know? Let's
Yeah.
not talk about retrofitting and let's not talk about comparisons. So it makes me wonder. So you have this leave everything alone, status quo, don't rock the boat, and then you have these stories like this one, and I'm going to put you up on the screen again here because honestly, Nick, this is a beautiful telling photo here. This cover story. I mean, it's if you're in the pump industry, I mean, that's that's got to get your heart moving, right? I mean, this whole concept, right? This beautiful pump process. You got this inside cover here about your impellers,
Mhm.
and maybe you can talk a little bit about that too. But the OC series impeller, and then you
Yeah,
got the
that's
actual 4-page written article here. And I think I need to shrink down the screen a little bit. And a great video, by the way. I was watching this earlier. So, yeah, maybe you can talk a little bit about uh, that particular site. I mean, where, you want to share about that?
yeah, in that case, that was I forget exactly where it was. That was in Germany, I believe. And that was an industrial application because the pump that's going in is a full cast stainless steel, which we do full cast stainless up to about 30 horsepower. That one's probably in that like somewhere between 5 to 10 range, that exact piece of equipment. But I believe that was in a food processing facility where they were dealing with a lot of clean in place SIP. So you get all your wash down from cleaning out different vats and tanks. And so they've got an absolutely wild composition of their wastewater. And a lot of these places will have some amount of treatment facility on site because they're not able to just dump this monstrous waste stream out into the general public. So they were eating up standard equipment. They were eating up their standard seal compositions and O-ring compositions. So they needed something that was more sustainable for them rather than replacing cast iron and Buna every year. So then we're looking at, okay, Viton seals and elastomers. We're looking at stainless steel construction. And that was really the name of the game there was looking at what options we had available to prevent them from continuing to just buy the exact same piece of equipment. And in that case, that was, I believe, one of our own pumps too. We had a cast iron pump in there and they went through that once or twice. And then instead of going to another manufacturer, they decided to give us a call or we'll gave our German counterparts a call and said, well, can you help us solve this problem? Because as I said, that's really where our core competency lies is trying to solve life cycle issues for our customers and not just be a fire and forget um, type of house. So when they started to learn a little bit more about what the failure modes are, about what they were actually dealing with, and they made a recommendation for what was at that time going to be a substantial outlay. I mean, a stainless steel pump is never a cheap endeavor. And so you got to be really looking kind of towards the future and seeing what sort of life cycle gains you're going to be getting on that. And in that case, it ended up being the right choice for them.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I want to go back to that article. I just, again, I just love talking about the pumps and the pump industry in general. And I'm looking at this here. Let me see if I can zoom in on it right here. If you aren't careful to verify what you have and what you will be receiving, you may end up with a problem when it comes to time to the install. That's you.
Hmm.
That's why it's important to communicate what you will be replacing to the supplier, who will have a lot more experience retrofitting equipment and should know all the particular precautions. I mean, this just is exactly where I'm going with this, Nick. It's human to human communication.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of so fundamental. If
And
you,
and that quote was kind of driven by not even any of these higher level discussions where we're talking about operating data, we're talking about waste stream makeup, we're talking about chemical compatibilities and all that sort of stuff. Even at a more baseline level than that, the amount of times that we've had to deal with or hadn't heard through our distribution cases where somebody just physically can't put the square peg in the round hole because nobody knew the hole was round.
mm,
So just
mm,
something as simple as like, well, this thing was small and the new thing is big, or vice versa.
yeah.
So that, like you're saying, having any amount of communication is just going to make the entire process that much smoother.
Well, I think, I mean, in the end, communicating with the understanding that genuine listening, I mean, it's got to be that Socratic way of
Yes. Hmm.
asking the questions and then listening to the response. I mean, all too often we see decisions are made um, either in a prejudicial way or it's a foregone conclusion. Yeah, 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 we know what we're doing. And then you find out 6 months later that because you had this predisposed way of thinking,
Hmm.
it actually worked against you. So true listening is the key here. And this is again, love doing these kind of lunch and learns because there's always something to learn.
Yeah. I
It's a
think that's an
dialogue.
important, yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's a very important thing too, that you're a very good example of that kind of person, of somebody that's interested in learning and trying to not be afraid to ask questions. Because I think that I've definitely seen it in this industry, and I'm sure that it's in most industries out there. Nobody wants to be the person that asks the question.
yeah,
I'll run I'll run training seminars on pump curves, on pump components, diagnostics, all that sort of stuff. And beforehand, I will always say, and I will implore people, I will plead with them to say, if you have a question, please ask it out loud in front of everybody. Because if you have that question, there's five other people at least in this room that have that exact same question. And
right.
then without fail, I'll finish up and one person will walk up to me and ask a question. I said, you could ask that in front of everybody because there's four other people out there that had the exact same question and they weren't even brave enough to come up and talk to me. So
Yeah.
being vulnerable is never a good feeling. And especially we've got a lot of kind of people that have been in this business for a long time, a lot of experienced. I don't want to say old timers, but guys and girls that have been out there and have done it for a long time, and they hold for granted a lot of this knowledge and information. And you have a much less experienced new crop of people coming in, and there's not as much of a fill in the middle. You've got a lot of top heavy, very experienced people, and you got a lot of brand new people. And the brand new people, they're nervous. They don't want to ask why. They don't want to ask, well, why do we do this? How do we do that, etc. And they just want to try to go through. And I think that's kind of human nature is nobody wants to be vulnerable in that way. And so empowering people like yourself show that it's important to learn, to get out there and all that's going to do is make you better at your job and more rounded and interesting person to be around too.
It's interesting. It's a two-way street. I'm beginning to realize, but the I'll give you an example. when I was a kid, I worked on a farm and I did drive a tractor around and I baled hay and milked cows and did things, farm stuff. And that was, 40 years ago or more. I'm just going to kind of put it there, but it's a long time ago. And a while back, I was helping somebody uh, bush hog or do something farm related on a tractor. And I was like, oh, yeah, I drove a tractor when I was 12, right? And I didn't have the hydraulics up high enough. And so I'm dragging what was a bush hog equipment around, unnecessarily putting pressure on it.
Mhm.
Now, the seasoned guy that walked in and said, "Hey, look, the next time you fire that thing up, raise that hydraulic." Um, Other people hearing me get this tribal knowledge thought, "Oh, did he embarrass you? Did he, And I'm like, hell no. I mean, honestly, that's one guy giving another guy honest tribal knowledge, right? You gotta, don't forget to look back and make sure you're up high enough. So other people hearing one guy giving another person instruction may consider it, oh, that was brutal and constructive and, ego bruising. And I'm like, no, quite the contrary. I wanted to, and if you don't think it's hard to get out on a YouTube video like this and just ask all the questions that other people will get. God, everybody knows what an impeller is, Vince, or everybody knows this or that. I think my point is that you have to be willing to kind of make yourself vulnerable for constructive criticism, tribal knowledge,
Mhm.
communication, which is a two-way street. It's not all me talking and not listening and that kind of thing. So I think these are some of the components of developing in a human world that I'm in. And I keep saying human because this thing called AI is coming, and AI is recording everything and transcribing everything right now. And I did ask you about technologies that are coming down the pike, and I there is no fear because I do know that a little side comment from one human to another may change the whole trajectory of a system. Um,
Mhm.
and I don't think that AI is quite able to pick up all those nuances quite yet. Would you agree with that? That there is a place for it, but it's not replacing this.
Absolutely. Yeah. I I will go on the record as, for all that that's worth, um, uh, as somebody that is healthily skeptical of the benefit and influence of AI kind of in the entire industry across every single aspect. There's a lot of people out there that are very, very bold in their statements of this is going to completely revolutionize this, that. And I do think that there is a lot of use cases that we can look at that this is going to be helpful in.
Yeah.
Like for instance, like digital twin modeling for systems. That's a very good use case right now. Is kind of like looking at and finding patterns in like a digital twin to your system and being able for that sort of pattern analysis to come through. But there's limitations there that are still going to be need to be kind of understood and addressed by the humans that are working there. The AI is, if somebody doesn't tell the AI that there's going to be a school built this year, and then all of a sudden, September 1st, uh, water demand in a district triples because they just built a 5,000 person school right there, then uh, it doesn't have time to learn to do that. But
Right.
that's kind of a specific example. But I think kind of just in general, I do agree that it much more. of a tool than a solution. And I think that that's an important thing for people to look at when they're integrating various AI applications into their workflow, into their processes, is looking at how can this help me move forward rather than how can this just be the single solution.
Yeah, interesting stuff, Nick. So, how do people get a hold of you? Let's just kind of wrap this up with if someone's looking for help, how do they get a hold of you? Your website, your email, and what's the best way to talk to you?
Website's a good place to start. HOMAPump.com, HOMAPUMP.com. There is an informational request box on there if they're interested in learning a little bit more about our equipment, our yeah, if you go to contact us in the top right, then if they want to get in touch directly, then you scroll on down and send in a contact form on the right-hand side there. If you're just looking for to get in touch with our distribution, there's a distributor finder on the little subsection one up right there, based on what your market is, where your zip code is
Right.
located. We also have our training education tab right there up top.
Yeah,
That's
no, this
relatively
is
new.
this is you, right? I mean, you're doing a lot of this, right?
Yeah, that is literally me right there on that photo.
Right, right, right.
That was me doing a an instructional teardown school at CWEA, the California Water uh, Environment
There he
Association
is.
show.
There he is.
Um, but there's some good information available here that I think will help people try to answer some of the questions that we were talking about. Talking about, for instance, in this case, you see the top one, how to properly size a pump for efficiency. Um, I highly encourage people to read through these, learn a little bit, and um, you can also get in touch with either the company or myself on LinkedIn. Not too hard to find.
Oh,
And
yeah.
if you have specific questions, then that's a good avenue to reach out for. And
Let me take a look at some of your
well,
products before we wrap up
yeah,
here. I'm just looking at them. Uh, these are I don't know if it's the quality of paint, but they've always got a sleek design look about these HOMA pumps. And again, trying to be objective here, but
they do a good
they
job at making them
show
pretty.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah, they really do show well in the at WEFTech and all that kind of thing. Are you going to WEFTech this year? It's in Chicago.
Yeah. As always, I'll be there. I'm setting up the booth. I'm tearing down the booth. I'm there for a good solid week.
I hear you, brother.
It's
Okay.
thankfully Chicago is one of my favorite places to be. So I'm really excited to go as always.
Just want to keep that name brand out there and talk about the great things HOMA does for the water and wastewater industry
I
worldwide.
appreciate it. Yeah. I appreciate you giving me the platform to get on and chat up with you too. It's always a
Thank
pleasure.
you. Thanks for your time.
All right.